Thanks, Stefanos. All right, we're going to move on to the next phase where we're talking about participating in clinical trials. This is something that's, if you've been coming to these conferences for many years, many more than me, you know that we didn't really have much to talk about in participating with clinical trials until very recently. So it's very exciting that we have these opportunities. The community has been craving new treatments, better treatments, and I think the time is just upon us, just about upon us, but it's critical that you all participate in that process. And we need more than just the people in this room. We need hundreds of people. Right now there are several companies that are recruiting for people, private pharma, recruiting people to participate in their trials. And we're going to get into how many people they need. And in the case of Netherton's, there's several Netherton's trials going on, and if we pretty much need everyone in our database to participate at least once. That's how the math works out. And we're going to talk a little about, working with the FDA and what's involved with that, and what some of the endpoints that are required, and the number of people that need to participate in order to make that trial valid, all those kinds of things. But we really want to encourage you. That's what this session is all about. Answer your questions, hopefully address some of your concerns so you feel more comfortable with maybe participating in a trial. So I'm going to start with Keith. I'm sort of working as the moderator here. Can you tell us what the difference is between like a phase 1, a phase 2, and a phase 3 trial?
I think that I'm actually going to pass the mic over to Amy.
Okay. All right. So phase 1 trials are very early on, and often done, for example, with people who have perfectly healthy skin, just to get some idea of the safety of a particular medication. It doesn't matter if it's topical or systemic. When we go to phase 2 trials, those are often looking at what dose do we want to use, or how often, or various parameters like that, setting up for the ultimate phase 3 trial, which is what leads then to the approval. So a phase 2 trial may be a dose escalation trial, or there may be different arms of it at a variety of different dosing to try and then compare and pick out from that. Now, that phase 2 trial does give information. It gives a lot of information about safety. It gives some early information about how effective something might be, but it's not the definitive trial, which is your phase 3 trial. Numbers of individuals goes up with these various trials, so you can have a relatively small number in a phase 2, but you've got to have enough in a phase 3 trial to be able to really do statistical analysis that show, at the very least, that your primary endpoints that you designate show a statistically significant difference from the use of the medication. So there are different grades, and then there's even phase 4 trials, which can be done after a drug is on the market to be able to do some additional trials.
I'm going to introduce Lauren Mills, who's from BioCryst, and she was sitting by her table for a little while there. Yes, Denise?
Well, there's clinical research. Okay, so any study becomes clinical research if it involves people. But usually when we talk about a trial, we're talking about an interventional trial where we're trying some potential new medication, or it could be a device. There are different kinds of trials, but that's the lingo that we usually use when thinking about a trial versus research or a study.
I have to say, we didn't talk about these questions ahead of time, so I might be surprising some people. So Lauren from BioCryst, who's recruiting for a trial right now, can you tell us, the FDA has made a bigger emphasis lately on patient-centered trial development, or patient-centered drug development. What does that mean for a pharmaceutical company for you, and how does that impact this community?
Yes, hi everyone, I'm Lauren Mills. I work at BioCryst Pharmaceuticals. We are currently, we have a clinical development team working very hard on a program for Netherton syndrome. We hope to get into healthy volunteers by the end of the year and Netherton's patients by next year. So we're really excited to be part of this conference, and thank you so much for being so welcoming. I think, to answer your question, Chris, the FDA is more closely requiring patient experience data, patient-reported outcomes when it comes to filing for a clinical trial. So what we try to do, I think as good industry partners, is really listen to the patient communities. So that comes in the form of, preclinical experience sharing, so surveys, advisory boards, focus groups, interviews, really listening to what would be meaningful for Netherton's patients, what is, most concerning for them, what are their most unmet needs that we could address, and making sure that our clinical teams know that, so that we are making decisions all along the way that affect the community in a positive way. So we really try to make sure that we're engaging appropriately and making sure we're listening and just being a good partner in the space so that we can, ultimately create a trial that is patient-focused, patient-friendly, really taking the needs of the community into consideration, because we want to make sure, we're not developing something in a silo. Our scientists are very smart and they're great at what they do. They're experts in the field. But you all are the experts in your condition. You are the patients, you are the community that can share their experiences with us to make sure that we're doing what's right for you all along the way. So that's really what we try to do as good industry partners in this space to make sure we're listening.
Great, thank you, Lauren. I'm going to call on Alan now. Alan is here from Leo Timber. And Alan, can you tell us one of the critical parts? Actually, I'm going to skip this one for the next one. I'm going to send it back maybe to Keith. He's been quiet here. So I said something in the beginning, in the introductory session about research and about, I used the baseball analogy that I've had in my head since, I've worked for the Cancer Society many, many years ago, about that academic research sort of gets the research to first or second base, and then private industry takes it up from between second base and third base and brings it home. When I was corrected, I ran that analogy by Dr. Mendelsohn the other day, and he said, you know what, all research these days pretty much starts out at second base. Because of all the basic biological research that's happened over the years up until today, we pretty much start out at second base. So, and now private industry is getting involved a little earlier. So what is the role of academic research now versus private industry?
So I think this is a great question. I mean, I think classically the paradigm shifting discoveries, for example, the initial discovery that you could even do CRISPR, came from academic environments, and then it is clinical translational researchers who take those basic advances, apply them to specific disease states, and come up with new therapeutics, right? And so I think that the majority of the sort of intellectual capital that underlies the work that's being done in industry frequently comes from institutions. And I'll also note that institutions have really moved into having a public-private consortium approach to this, even with angel investors that are specifically funding individual things that are coming out of laboratories. And so more frequently you have investigators who have not only a research lab, but also are part of founding completely new companies that are typically small and then acquired, directed towards developing new things. And so this is why I think one of the things that you've seen is we are, as a team, Dr. Paller and I and the other individuals who are engaged in research here, really trying to apply cutting-edge new technologies that are going to give us additional fundamental biological insight. Because when we're simply taking old drugs and trying to repurpose them, we frequently don't hit the target the way that we need to. What we need is fundamental biological understanding, which I think, for example, the work that's being done with kallikreins and Netherton syndrome really is a perfect example of that. The work that was done in mouse models that showed us the evidence that inhibition of kallikrein 5 could ultimately reverse the disease phenotype was really what drove us towards the development of these therapeutics. And so, at the end of the day, it's the basic work that feeds the translation in industry.
Thank you. So Alan, I'm going to go back to Alan now from Leo. So he works for Leo, and they had an idea. And the idea really starts with, a lot of times you have to start with the FDA. Can you talk a little bit about working with the FDA? How did you develop those endpoints that Dr. Paller was referring to, and developing what the trial is going to look like?
Sure. I appreciate this opportunity. And first and foremost, I want to thank anybody in this room who has participated in any of our 3 trials. I particularly want to thank Drs. Paller and Choate for all of their real support. Yale and Northwestern have been huge contributors to what we've been able to achieve. What I can say is, as was previously said, the value of this population, this constituency of people with this condition, is far underestimated by you. You are underestimating the power and the control that you have in your own destiny. And I'll give you the perfect example from our phase 3 trial. Due to the help from Chris, we actually, before we designed this final trial, which is going to be the one that should hopefully get us over the finish line and get us approval, we assembled an advisory board of patients within FIRST and families who actually have the condition. And we said to them, we'll show you some pictures. You tell us, what would you consider an improvement? What would you consider the amount? What's the most important thing that you think that our drug needs to be able to do for you? Because we've had families who've said to us, I just want my kid to be able to put on his sneakers. That would be success. Other people say, I'd like to be out and go outside and be able to sweat. That's not the classical way, I can tell you, because I've been doing clinical drug trials for 25 years. I've worked on ustekinumab, what Dr. Pala brought up. Did a lot of the development program for their arthritis program. So I know how big pharma, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer and such works. And I can tell you that we actually took the ideas that we got from the advisory board, from patients and families like you, and we went to the FDA and say, we want to design the trial to include all of these endpoints. So for example, our advisors have told us that a 25 or 30% improvement, I was talking to Mr. and Mrs. Kroll yesterday, would be sufficient for us to say, that's a good starting point. If you can show us that you have improved within 12 weeks, at least some, we'll let you continue to take the drug for another 12 weeks and see, with the hypothesis that some people don't fully respond within 3 months, right? Because this is what we were told. We made sure to include as many patient outcomes as we could. So for example, I'd love to hear, from Dr. Pala and Dr. Choate, though there are lots and lots of really good efficacy questionnaires. There aren't that many good ichthyosis-specific questionnaires for quality of life, because most of the ones that are used, something called the Children's Dermatology Life Quality Index, or the Adult Dermatology Life Quality Index. What was fascinating that we found was, in our earlier trials, in our phase 2 trials, was how useless they were in the ichthyosis community, because it's scored on a score of 0 to 10, and people got to score it, actually from 0 to 30, I should say. Okay, with 30 being the most severe, 10 being, the borderline between mild and moderate. The average score on that questionnaire in this population was about a 6 or a 7. So based on that questionnaire, everybody in this room has a perfectly dandy quality of life. Nothing is bothering them. The point is, that's the wrong questionnaire to ask you folks. So we actually included a questionnaire that comes from a pretty well-known physician in France, Professor Mazaro-Hotier, that is specific for ichthyosis. It's an ichthyosis quality of life questionnaire that asks about how red are you today? How much are you sweating? Have you had problems with smell? Issues that are really of concern and interest to this community. And the FDA said, sure, we'll let you test that. When we went to the FDA, based on a really small number of patients, it was 30 patients. And just to put that in perspective, when you do a psoriasis trials tend to have 900, 1,000 patients in them. We are running right now, and those who've participated in our trial program, we are running right now the largest program combined in X-linked, lamellar, bathing suit, Harlequin, and CIE that has ever been done in the history of the literature. There are 150 patients in total in our program, which makes the program also very, very high risk, because Dr. Pala brought up, The larger your sample size, the less difference between the drug and the placebo, or in our case, the drug and the vehicle, the material that the drug is in. It makes it much, much harder, the smaller the number of patients you use, to actually prove an endpoint sufficient for the FDA to say, you've proven your endpoint. So, but when we went to the FDA and we had limited data, we only had 30 patients worth of data, they said, you can study anybody you want based on these 30 patients. You can study, you can study X-linked, you can study EHK, you can study confetti, you can study whatever you want. We only had data on patients ages 9 and above. They said, yeah, you can study neonates if you want. You can study 2-year-olds if you want. It's all up to you. So around rare diseases, I can tell you that the FDA around this, if I tried that with a psoriasis trial, they wouldn't even answer the phone. But with rare diseases, my point is simply 2 points. You have a lot more power. As Mr. Wright said yesterday, think different, okay? Get rid of any concept that you don't have control over your care or your family's care. Because I can guarantee you, from my own evidence, the FDA cares about what this community thinks about. And you need to advocate as much as you can for yourself. Whenever you go to your doctor, you say to them, are there any clinical trials going on? Can I go to those sites? Can you tell me where they are? You can go to clinicaltrials.gov. That's a great place to find out where trials are going on. And you can actually find results. By government rules, you have to put your results up on that trial within a year of the trial being done. So you can know if the trials work or not, if the drugs work or not. That's a great resource. But just again, sustain and harness the power that you have in terms of influencing how your care is going to be taken care of.
So, one of the challenges that we have, though, is enrollment. And that's something that I really need to highlight. We as investigators actually end up subsidizing trials when people don't enroll. So, for example, we're running the IL-36 trial for Netherton's right now. We were unable to enroll any adults at Yale. We're now open to adolescents. We're probably going to be unable to enroll any adolescents. It may affect the capacity of the company to be able to obtain approval for a drug that may be efficacious, and it's going to leave Yale on the hook for about $30,000 for having a trial that never enrolled any subjects. And so there's 2 sides to this. I think there's also an obligation to participate in clinical trials that are potentially relevant to your disease type. Because if we don't enroll, there's no way to know whether they work.
I can add to that, there was a previous IL-36 receptor antibody trial, just like the one you're talking about. It closed because the enrollment was so slow that the board of the company said, you can't keep this open.
So that touches on a topic. Alan talked about how his drug started out for a couple different skin types, but maybe it's going to branch out in years to come as they find it's efficacious for other skin types. And that's always the hope. But I want to ask the panel, and maybe Lauren, why are so many of the studies starting out with Netherton's? We had 10 Netherton's people here this weekend.
Because we understood the disease better, okay? So there were wonderful mouse models that very clearly pointed to kallikreins. With respect to the IL-36, the transcriptional analyses showed that the IL-36, particularly IL-36 gamma, was at the top of every list, and particularly in patients with Netherton syndrome. And so that's why companies were putting forward that. And then the kallikrein is based on beautiful studies, for example, that showed not just that they were up in these mouse models of Netherton syndrome, but also that if you basically took away these kallikreins, or the ability in the same mouse that had the Netherton syndrome to make these kallikreins, the whole thing would reverse. So there's beautiful studies done in labs that have really pointed to that pathway, and that's why we're all stressing the need to help us understand exactly what's going on to find that perfect target.
Thank you. So I think I'm going to take a second right now to ask, this first part of the conversation is really about how do clinical trials work? What is it on the academic side, the private industry side, how it works for them? Now we're going to talk about how it works for you a little bit. But before we get into that, are there any questions about how clinical trials work, what it means for the companies and what they're looking for? Go ahead, Jim.
This may be very specific, but I went to clinicaltrials.gov once and saw a study being done with using an HVAC with mRNA to produce the TGM1 enzyme. And it was phase 1, I think. And they were actually, I believe, doing small spots where they're doing injections. And they got some good results from that phase 1. And then I can't find anything else about what's going on with it anymore. So I have trouble with continuity with finding out how something's going on.
How long ago was this? Was it a decade ago?
This was, I think, 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Okay, yeah, okay. That was, I know exactly what you're talking about. So the company that I was talking about that did the the topical, wasn't injected, it was topical gene therapy for epidermolysis bullosa, the blistering disease that I said was moving on to lamellar ichthyosis. They were doing that in a very small number of patients just to kind of get that started, see if we could get in with some early good results. But, companies, especially smaller companies, can't take on too much at one time. Millions and millions of dollars go into first doing preclinical and then more into doing an actual trial. So they can't do a whole lot at once. So that's exactly the new direction they're going next.
They need to raise a significant amount of capital to be able to move forward with the clinical trial. And I'd be interested in maybe hearing from Alan exactly how much, give us a ballpark of how much it costs to do the trial that you guys are doing right now.
Our total program cost about $25 million, which is relatively nothing when you talk about big pharma. But for a company that literally, we were timber, there were 9 of us, we, frankly, in a bad market, that's all it took. In a bad market where we couldn't raise sufficient capital, we were extraordinarily fortunate that Leo Pharma believed in us, believed in the project, and I give them a tremendous amount of kudos for seeing the promise. And if I may be somewhat provocative, because those who know me know that I barely spare words, I throw out the challenge. I mean, I think that, for example, Dr. Paller and Dr. Choate showed some fantastic data. I would love to see Johnson & Johnson put up $100 million to do a trial with ustekinumab. I would love to see that. I would love to see the dupilumab people, Sanofi, put up $100 million or $200 million, which is a sneeze, for them to do a trial. I would love to see that happen. The problem is the problem that I, as a consumer of drugs and working for a drug company, drug companies are companies. They have a certain level of profit margin. What I can tell you, however, is people who spend their careers or their time doing this do this out of the love and the desire to make a difference for people like you. Like people, not like you, for constituents like you. Because, I can personally tell you, just from a personal standpoint, I believed so much in this project that I left a job and took a 20% pay cut just to come and work on this. Now, I'll be perfectly blunt, I'm not living on Skid Row or anything. But that's the key behind it, is that people like Leo, like Dr. Paller, like Dr. Choate, who are dedicating hours and hours and years of their time, are doing it for the love of trying to help people. So there is always, unfortunately, going to be the balance of the economics versus the desire to do good. Oh, yes, sure.
So a few things. First of all, There are some incentives to help with rare diseases. I want to make sure that people are aware of that. And these have been governmental new rules that will help. For example, if you're working with a rare disease, it gives you patent protection for another 6 months. And there are new rules with respect to trials in children that are helping those going along. In fact, requiring companies to do work in children so we can involve children in some of these studies. So that has been helping somewhat. The other thing I will say is that, yes, I mean, smaller companies really get behind these and put up a tremendous amount of capital. But I wouldn't say that the larger companies aren't interested at all. I mean, we had Johnson & Johnson, Janssen, fund the ustekinumab study that we did. We have a study now for genetic disorders funded by Regeneron, which makes the dupilumab. They're different in that they do these small little pilots with investigators first to try to get a sense before they're going to make the investment. So it's a little bit different thing in the approach. But I wouldn't say that they're totally uninterested.
No, I did the same thing. It's the concept of, in a population of people with a condition, do you put the toe in the water approach, or do you jump in head first? And some companies do, as you point out, and I did this for many years when I was at J&J or Pfizer or Sun. You know, we had the amount but we usually did the toe in. At Leo, we jumped full in because we know the need is so great. We're not wasting time.
So I think that's one major difference. So I was recruited to run a division of AbbVie many years ago that was focused on psoriasis. They're doing the basic research on psoriasis on their campus, right? And so the fundamental difference is the basic research for ichthyosis is happening in academic environments rather than pharmaceutical environments. The funding behind ichthyosis research is here. The funding in industry is here, right? And so we're just working a lot harder to be able to get those initial insights that are going to be able to provide the next therapeutic.
Okay, I want to move on to what it means for our community here. Lauren and then Gabby. So sort of two-part question. First Lauren can start, then Gabby, you can chime in. Lauren, what do you think some of the considerations are that people should make before they decide to participate in a clinical trial? What are some of the things they should think about?
That's a great question. And when you, I guess, approach your physician or your specialist or whoever you're seeing about your condition, you have the right to ask as many questions as you want about the trial and be referred to, the investigator of the trial. So I think things to consider would be, where the sites are. Are they in close proximity to your location? How far are you willing to travel to those clinical trial sites? You can review all of the materials and documentation up front about the protocol that will tell you, how many visits are required each month, what kind of testing is done at those visits, how, the duration of the visits, what, people involved in clinical trials do usually get a compensation for participating and for their time. It could be travel stipends as well. And really kind of what the end result of the trial is measuring. So you have, you should ask as many questions and be as comfortable as possible before, deciding to participate in a clinical trial and asking as many questions as possible. But I think it's just really important to make sure that you're, feeling familiar and feeling like your questions are answered and that your voice is heard and that you are able to participate. And you also do have the right, if you, later on down the road decide you'd like to withdraw from the trial, you have the right to do that as well. If your circumstances change or your living situation changes, that's also something that you're able to do. So I think, all good things to consider when you're, thinking about participating. Gabby.
Okay, so Gabby, what were some of the considerations you took in? I'm particularly thinking about washout. That's one of the things I get a lot of questions about. What were some things you weighed before making a decision to participate?
One thing I thought about was my health. I think it's important to focus on your well-being prior to research. Washing out, I am currently on IVIG and Dupixent, and so taking that into consideration of whether or not participation in this would help me was really important. I struggle a lot with pain and breaking out, and so I was worried that participating would just make my condition worse. And so I think it's really important just to focus on that, but also furthering research, I believe, is also very important. And so I am willing to, I would say, suffer a bit more if it has a better end result in the future.
Would you do it again?
I would do it again, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing to what Lauren said. I think we're in an era now where it is fair for patients, particularly with rare diseases, to actually request that drug companies provide the drug to patients who participate in the trials until the drug is approved on the market. When we initially started our trial, we were, as Dr. Choate pointed out, we really were underfunded. Our goal was always to be able to actually provide drug to any study participant in the trial beyond the point when the trial was over. But we didn't have the money. And again, having a savior like Leo, who came forward and said, in fact, the CEO of Leo said, as part of buying the company, we want to ensure that you have to institute an additional year of treatment, at least here in the United States and also in Europe, for anybody who participated in our trial who wants to get the drug for free for another year. And we'll monitor you and we'll check things and stuff. But every patient, for example, in our current trial program who participated is going to have another year starting in October to get more drug. And I think that every person in this room should ask that also before they participate, which is, yeah, I mean, it needs to be I think it's not unfair and we get advice from physicians, Dr. Paller, Dr. Choate, all the time, for that request, in fact, to be made. And we advise you that you need to put in an extra year or two of treatment, and the company should have to try to do that for the very reasons we're talking about, which is, I fully understand, having participated in a clinical trial myself many, many years ago for whatever. There is a definite level of anxiety and fear and concern. Am I getting the stuff? Am I not getting this stuff? Am I going to get worse? Is it going to make me better? All of those kinds of things. Is it going to hurt me? So it takes a certain level of bravado, I think, to join a clinical trial. But you guys are the bravest people I've personally ever met, as I told my colleagues at first, this morning. It's like, that's what I get out of this. It's every time I leave a first conference, I'm even more impassioned to do better work. So, it must be a symbiotic relationship. We have to, in pharma, give you something you need if we're going to ask you to take that chance of washing out, of stopping your other therapies, whatever the case may be.
Can I just add to that? I think it's really important to recognize that everybody who's going to move forward with the trial does get people to advise, like, for example, Keith and myself, if it's related to ichthyosis. And we always recommend that someone who enrolls in a trial has an opportunity to continue on the medication. We think that's incredibly important. But I do want to mention that there are early trials sometimes where the safety is not established, and that just can't happen. And I don't want you to be discouraged if you look into one of these and you can't get it. Sometimes what we can then do is say, well, we'll bring that patient back for the next one, or we'll just directly put them into the open label extension, being on the medication as soon as we have that available. But don't be afraid then of the early ones where you're not going to be able to get it right then and there long term. We still absolutely have to have those to move forward to the next state where we can get it.
Yeah, we have one patient, fortunately, at Yale, that's managed by one of Dr. Choate's colleagues, Dr. Bunick, who participated in 2 of our 3 trials. He participated in the middle one, didn't get an extension, and now, he just came back. Yeah, some of Dr. Paller's patients. Dr. Paller participated in the very first trial that we ever did. Now patients are coming back. So I think that's an excellent point. I'm sorry I didn't cover it.
I want to highlight one really important thing, and that is one of the best resources that you have is your doctor. Because evaluating a clinical trial as a patient, I think, is really hard to do. And especially as we see multiple therapeutics coming out for specific indications, I think that your doctors will have opinions about which are the most likely to be helpful for you. And as we see the space become more crowded, it's really important for you to engage with individuals who are experts so that you can be educated consumers. And I'm really proud of FIRST for sponsoring this panel to begin that conversation, but I think that there's a lot of conversations that need to be had with you, with your physicians, with your family, but also with members of the Medical and Scientific Advisory Board, whose job really is to be able to provide advice about opportunities.
And we recognize that not everybody has a dermatologist, let's say, who has a clue about these trials, but that's what we're here for. So you can certainly send a note to FIRST or us directly. We can link you with people who are on the Medical Scientific Advisory Board, who may be close to you, who may even know your physician, or reach out. So you need to bring these questions to your physician and recognize that your physician may not even know what you're talking about, but that's an opportunity for education of your own doctor that you're having a long-term relationship with, and that's a very important role for us and for FIRST.
One last one for Gabby. Can you talk about just the logistics of your participation? What did it mean for you? What was it on a day-to-day basis, and how long did it last? And talk a little bit more about your experience.
Okay, so I participated in Coyne's Netherton's trial. It lasted, I think, a total of, I want to say, 2 to 3 months. I was flown from San Jose to San Diego, and I did a round trip every day. They covered my lodging and food and airfare. The physicians there, I feel, were interested in the research and not the patient care, which I found to be a little disappointing. I found that it was also really disappointing that I wasn't able to continue on in their study, but I know that I think it was a phase 2, so I know that
Great, I think that's very helpful. So far in this past hour, the panel has very graciously answered all my questions and all things I was interested in, but hopefully some of them were things that you were interested in too. But now I want to take a few minutes to have the panel answer your questions. What are some of the considerations you're making as you see all these opportunities? And hopefully you're weighing them and thinking about participating. Are there any other?
One thing that I'm listening to and I'm hearing about all these studies and the trials, I'm hearing that the age range, and what's concerning me is the ones who are beyond, I guess, the age that y'all are looking for. I don't understand why they are being excluded. And it hurts me because my wife has put up with this for 77 years, and she wants answers. I mean, and it bugs her because I hear her say every day, I wish I didn't have this skin. And to hear that there's a cutoff, it makes me hurt because I cannot help her. I want to find out if there's a study that she can get into, that she can get some answers and help. Maybe just a 10% peace of mind.
Sure.
So I'm not sure what studies you're talking about. Certainly for all the studies we were doing here, we were taking anybody's age. Sometimes cells don't grow well above a certain age, so that was one where we, especially when we were a little short on that, but otherwise we certainly were doing that in studies. For example, the topical isotretinoin study did not have an age cutoff at all. Could have been part of that. I don't know, what we're talking about, because obviously certain ones are for certain subtypes of ichthyosis. I will say that there have been a few studies that, when we're talking about older individuals, like in the eczema world and the psoriasis world, have had some cutoffs that the company decided, and a lot of that was just, to be perfectly honest, because they didn't want to see safety issues come up that come up more with an older population. If we're talking about younger children, that's a different concern, although again, it's about safety, and oftentimes we might start a study in adults. If things look okay, go down to adolescents, or sometimes that's rolled in, then down to younger ages. I think you're talking obviously about somebody who's not a child here in your comment, but if there are exclusions, unfortunately, some drug companies have done that, not usually with topicals, but sometimes systemics, just because they're worried about safety issues that come up much more in an older population. It's not to be exclusive, but rather to just make sure that the results don't get altered by the number of safety-related issues that come up in that age group, to be able to move forward. Now, once it's out there on the market, of course, it can be available for a broader group.
She just got diagnosed with deep nerves, and she knew she had ichthyosis, but she didn't know what it was. And when she finally got it, it was a rare one. And my wife is, she's analytical up here in the head. She'll ask you, 100 million questions. And you give her an answer for one, she's gonna have another 100 million questions to ask you. That's how her mind works. And I just want her to have the best quality she can have towards the end of her life. I want her to be able to get up every morning and not have that thought in her head of constantly having to feel that she's feel like she's left out in the cold.
Yeah.
It's not exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
There's really almost nothing that she couldn't try. There's nothing approved for ichthyosis right now, so there's really nothing. All these trials that we're doing, they haven't had cutoffs on age, and it's just a matter of being able to get the medication. She needs to work closely with her doctor and reach out to us. And we don't know the situation, of course, at all, or what even subtype of ichthyosis you have. But I would strongly encourage you to work with your doctor on other possibilities.
And that's really the thing. You need to be tied into a center that knows ichthyosis, right? Because those are the connections, right? And it may mean that you take one visit a year to Texas or California or Illinois or Connecticut just to be brought up to date, and then see someone locally if you don't have a great expert that's sitting in your hometown. We have been working really hard to get more experts out there by taking all these young people that you've seen at this meeting and getting them inspired by the meaningfulness, and that's one of the most important things that I think comes out of this conference, is inspiring the next generation of people who are going to seek to make a difference in the field. Make sure that you're connected with one of those.
That's what I'd like to find out, who I can get in contact with, I don't care if I have to drive to California.
Would you talk with us after the meeting then?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
All right, so
Yeah, I mean, in our trial, the youngest, as I told you, the trial started off in 6 years and above. But we got a special case of a 4-year-old who needed to be in the trial. We negotiated with the institution where the study was being done, And they said, sure, we'll do it. So even though the FDA said start at 6, we actually have a trial in a child in both halves of our trial. That was 4 years of age. And the oldest patient, I think in our trial, we had one 90-year-old, but we had some people who were in their 70s. So it's just participate.
My question actually is probably more on the research side than the clinical trial side, but the skin taping and the biopsies and stuff that you guys take, so it doesn't matter where it's taken in the skin, it will show you the same results?
No, it does matter. And depending on, if you're culturing for cells, the cells presumably would reflect anywhere, although there might be some differences from external influences. But regardless, it's really important that we have lesional, and hopefully that was done, ideally the best area for capturing that. That said, there is something to say for the site as well, because there are some site-specific differences, whether we're looking at the microbiome or whether we're looking at the expression of genes and proteins, or whether we're looking at the fats or lipids in the barrier. And so we've tried very much to capture them from the arm, or as a second choice from the thigh in what we're doing, but we realize there's some people here who predominantly have, for example, involvement of the palms and soles, and in some cases, I would say go back to the tape strip people and ask them to do it again, because that's really what we want as well, and that's so easy. Biopsies, I will say, there's certain areas it's a little easier to take those from. We sometimes in a trial have to do things kind of at the edge of the bottom of the foot or something, but we wouldn't choose to do that when we're just choosing an area. So there was some decision making made in that, but yes, in general, we want to have something that's going to show something, because it's actually, when we look at it, looks affected.
Are there any other questions? What is preventing you from participating? What are some of your concerns or questions that we could perhaps have answered today that might have you give it a second thought, give it a second chance? Anyone have any more questions? Tracy. I'm like Phil Donahue from the old days.
Okay, I'm super excited about all the research that's happening. My daughter's 38 years old, and I've never seen this level of interest in ichthyosis. I guess my concern, and this might just be more of a comment to the crowd in general, is that if we don't have people come forward and participate in these trials, are the companies going to stop doing research because they can't get enough people, and they're not going to want to, the next company's not going to want to put money into it because the last one that looked promising didn't even make it to the FDA.
Yes.
And so I just want to really encourage all of you to consider that. We've been waiting forever for better treatments, better therapies, and a cure. And if we don't help out the people that are putting their time and their life and their energy and their money into this, then you might never see that happen.
Thank you.
One more thing I wanted to add regarding the students that have come up through your programs. When I lived in Columbus, the doctor that we had there when my first child was born was formerly a student of Dr. Paller's, and it gave us access to ichthyosis services in a city that would otherwise not have had it. And recently in my current city, our older director was a leader in the American Dermatology Association, and she retired. The replacement was Sarah Skillman, who was one of the doctors who's come to prior conferences and been part of the clinical trials here. And just the fact that you were bringing these people up and giving them the opportunities to research and understand ichthyosis has had personal impacts on probably many of us, especially in smaller cities.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any other questions?
With the last topical treatment that they're still working on, that's in the last stages, our daughter wanted to be in the study, and she was in the Accutane study years ago. But the problem is, if you work and they're so far away from where you live and they can't work with your doctor, well, you can't do it. even though they pay your way, they pay, you can't miss that much work. You have to be with your doctor. But when she asked, she'd have to go to Philadelphia, was it? San Antonio, I think. But she couldn't go that often. So if it could work where it could work with the other doctors too, somehow, and I know that would probably fall with the FDA, but.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and that is a huge problem. I can tell you honestly, that is a huge problem. There aren't, as pointed out, there aren't as many experts in the country skilled enough to be able to differentiate whether a drug works or not. You see two of the leaders right here. Frankly, there is a desire to invest in having more sites. It's just very hard sometimes to get physicians that live in local communities to actually participate. So there are lots of large cities that we went to, I'm not going to name any of them, that we went to and we said to the expert in that city, will you participate? And they said they can't do it. So what ended up happening, and it's not a criticism, it's the fact, it's the truth. And so, what we tried to do in our trial is we tried to introduce more telehealth visits. The problem with that is the FDA doesn't like those. And so we have to play within the ballpark that they give us. So you give a little bit on who can come into the trial, you have to give back a little bit. So we tried to reduce the number of in-office visits as much as we could without getting them angry at us. But even then, as you point out, for some people, even doing that is inadequate. So for example, in our trial, we required genetic testing, which wasn't a blood test, it wasn't a biopsy. It was you take a Q-tip, you put it in your mouth, you put it in a tube, you send it to the lab. You could do that at home. You didn't have to go to the office. And in fact, if you qualified, if you had the right genotype, then you would go to the office. So that's, again, another thing I think that as we're early in the conversation, industry needs to think about more, which is for rare diseases, not everybody lives in Chicago or lives in Yale, in New Haven, or lives in New York City, or Atlanta or such, or even Jackson, Mississippi. We had a site in Jackson, Mississippi. So I think that's a problem that needs to be solved.
And I'll just mention too, we've really looked into things like, can we run studies on the weekend? Because it would be great. You could fly out Friday night, you could be seen Saturday, you can get back. And one of the problems is that at academic institutions and many of these other sites, they won't open their clinical research unit on the weekends. And so, we're kind of constrained. That would be great.
I want to thank our panel. I think this was really, really informative. I hope you got a lot out of it. Participating in clinical research, I just want to remind you, is partially about you, and I think there are some benefits to you, but it really is about finding better treatments and possibly cures for generations down, for people farther down the road. There is a certain altruistic aspect to participating in clinical trials, and it's so important as a member of this very small community to sort of pay it forward a little bit, and you have to have that as part of the consideration of participating in clinical trials. And we hope, everyone here hopes that you will give it a second thought and think about participating in these very, very important studies that are coming forward. So I want to thank Lauren, Gabby, Alan, Amy, and Keith. This was really, really very informative. Thank you very much. '24. I hope you had a great time. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you made a lot of connections. So important for you to meet other people who are living in your skin, who understand what it means to be someone affected by ichthyosis or be a parent of someone living with ichthyosis. I think we had a lot of great sessions, but I'm always amazed at how many people I see wandering around the hallways while there's sessions going on. And that sometimes is just as important. You're making those connections with others while you're wandering the halls or going to a baseball game or going to an escape room, those kinds of things. I hope you really enjoyed it. We talked a lot about, during this session and the previous session, about the importance of surveys. We also will be sending out a survey in the coming week, and it's also very, very important for you to fill out that survey to give us your impressions of this weekend, what you liked, what you didn't like. We took the survey results from 2022 in Providence, and it really did inform the sessions we had, the food we served, the temperature of the rooms, the location, all those things. So please do, excuse me? We didn't ask for that. Yeah. the heat on the 11th floor, absolutely. So take that into consideration. Please do fill out those surveys. I want to give one last thanks to our board of directors who helped, plan some of this, and of course to our staff, to Denise, to Chris Wassel, to Lisa Bruning. I think that they're going to go home and they're going to be very, very happy with the results. I hope you go home and you're very happy with the results and what you experienced here, and hope it was worth your while. Thank you. We'll be announcing 2026, I think, in the next couple weeks. There was a lot of people asking me about 2026 already, and we want to get it to a place where we announce the next conference at the end of this conference. So we're getting very close to doing that. And we'll see you there, Mystery Place, in 2026.